The European colonizers wanted to enslave people to do farm work for free. The people in West Africa were living happy lives, but they didn't know what was coming. The West African people were kidnapped, and people stole them into slavery. They all were stuffed into a boat, and life was very difficult. They sailed for miles and miles. The people started to get sick, so sick from food poisoning or a disease. Many people died or were so sad they drowned themselves because they wanted to die. The enslaved people worked so hard for no money to harvest tobacco, and the landowners became rich. Life as an enslaved person was really, really hard. Slavery was what brought black people to the U.S. in 1619 and began their long fight for freedom. And Stono Rebellion was able to happen in South Carolina and was an important step in that fight.
The story of the Stoner Rebellion is a huge part of the fight for freedom and fairness. Enslaved people wanting freedom from the Spanish people in Florida is what led to my event. The harsh conditions that the slaves had to go through, this with treatment, work, and punish them to want freedom even more. Before this, the first slaves arriving helped set up what happened next. On September 9, 1739, Germany gathered about 20 enslaved people near the Stono River. They gathered there to head south towards Florida in search of freedom. Before they started to head to south, they broke into a shop to steal firearms for their journey. They went from 20 people to 6. They continued to, however, some of the slave owners caught up with slaves and began to execute them.
This event reminds us that standing up for what is right can change the world. Since those slaves decided to fight for their freedom, the Negro Act of 1740 was a law that was put in place. It included things such as allowing slave owners to whip and kill slaves who were rebellious, and also banned slaves from growing food, learning to read, or earning money. The Stono Rebellion made things a little bit better because slave owners improved in some of their treatments and rewards towards slaves so that they would not rebel again. Because of the Stono Rebellion, Phyllis Wheatley and her poetry was able to happen, and the fight for justice continued.
The Haitian Revolution started August 1791 through 1804. It was started by a massive uprising of the Chinese slaves in colonies, slaves in northern Saint Domingue, which has been colonized by the French. The slaves were mad about how their day-to-day life was, which included 18 hours of hard work and only 6 hours of rest. This slave rebellion ended slavery and colonial rule in French. Saint Domingue in the Caribbean, this became Haiti, a nation of former slaves. Themselves, this was when slavery was still allowed worldwide.
White men traded guns for African American people and sailed back to the New World, then sold them for money and went to Europe to buy more guns. The transatlantic slave trade lasted for 366 years. Over that time, around 12 million people were kidnapped from their home in Africa. Then they were put into boats and were forced to be slaves in the New World. As we know, Haitian Revolution began to change popular opinion on the right to own slaves. The ending of the transatlantic slave trade was a big win for the black people's fight to freedom. It became illegal to trade slaves across the sea. Denmark was the first nation to ban importing slaves from Africa in 1803. Britain banned it in 1807. The U.S. banned it in 1808. One reason some people wanted to abolish the transatlantic slave trade in the U.S. was because they wanted to trade slaves domestically without competition. The end of the transatlantic slave trade matters because no more slaves are being trafficked from Africa, but the practice of slavery was not over yet.
Nat Turner was an African American slave who wanted revenge on white people. When he was 22 years old, he seen a solar eclipse and took it as a sign. Another one happened the same year. That's how he knew the time was right. He waited till dusk to strike. Then he killed the Travis family first. He killed over 60 white people. On his way to Jerusalem, he was ambushed by the government. He managed to escape and hide for 2 months. Once he was found, he was hung, fled, decapitated, and buried in an unmarked grave.
My name's Makai, and I'm doing the Amistad case. This story was in 1931 through 1938. On July 1st, 1932, Portuguese slave hunters abducted a large group of 53 Africans on board of the Schooner La Amistad from Sierra Leone and shipped them to Havana, Cuba, a center of the slave trade. But the Africans seized the ship and killed the captain and ordered 2 shipwrights, Jimenez and Ruse, to sail the ship back to Africa. The thing that caused the event was Nat Turner. His rebellion caused it.
After the rage and excitement of the Amistad case, things cooled down a bit, but not much. The decree of the Emancipation Proclamation might have been one of the most important events in history for the slaves. It was issued by Abraham Lincoln on January 1st, 1863. Before this decree was issued, many enslaved people tried to resist slavery by escaping to Union lines. This military decree was issued when the nation was approaching its 3rd year of the Civil War. It freed slaves that were working against the Union. This encouraged them to join it, seeing as how it was a much more positive workspace than the previous one. However, despite the slim torrent of joy, that was short-lived. After all, the Emancipation Proclamation was limited in certain ways. It only applied to states that had seceded from the Union, which left slavery at large in loyal border states. This decree was still very important because it triggered a realization. If the slaves fled to the Union, they could potentially be free. This event made things much better for the slaves, and it fueled the burning passion to win the war and overcome the Southerners. Because of this decree, the war took a positive and strong turn in our favor. The fight for justice was nearing its end, but it still wasn't over.
The ratification of the 13th Amendment began on December 6, 1865. This means that slavery was motioned to end. Madison wanted slavery to end a long time ago, but there wasn't enough votes. Even though slavery was going to end, it was not enough, so they made slavery a crime. The day when slavery officially ended was January 31st, 1865. This freed 4 million slaves and changed the government by far. President Abraham Lincoln signed it and made it a part of the U.S. Constitution. Slavery was gone. But when President Lincoln died, Andrew Johnson, who was vice president before Lincoln died, went into office. He wanted slavery to come back, but he couldn't because it was in the U.S. Constitution. Most states hated slavery, but others didn't. There were 11 states who loved slavery, and they were all in the South. They loved slavery because they thought it gave them a good reputation. Also, it was a huge part of their economy. For instance, cotton was a huge part and mostly made on slave labor. They wanted slaves back. The fight had begun, and the NAACP was a big part of it.
The NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, was founded in 1909 to fight for the rights of Black Americans. Racial segregation and discrimination were legal in many parts of the country, and Black people faced violence, unfair treatment, and limited opportunities. The NAACP was created to challenge these injustices through legal action, protests, and advocacy. One of its biggest victories was Brown versus the Board of Education case in 1954, which led to the end of segregation in public schools. This decision was a major step forward in the fight for equal education and civil rights. The NAACP played a major role in some of the most important moments in Black American history. During the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s, the organization supported leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. and worked to pass laws like the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. These laws helped to end segregation and protect the right to vote for Black Americans. The NAACP also fought for justice in cases like the murder of Emmett Till and the protection of civil rights activists. Their work connected to earlier struggles such as the fight against slavery and segregation, and later movements like the Black Panthers and the push to end apartheid in South Africa. Even today, the NAACP continues to fight for equality and justice. It works to stop discrimination in education, jobs, and the legal system, showing that the fight for civil rights is not over. Just as past leaders worked to make change, new generations must continue the struggle for fairness and equality. The NAACP's history is a reminder that progress is made through courage, persistence, and the power of standing together against injustice.
The Harlem Renaissance started in 1920 and ended in 1930, but 10 years later, the economic boom was over. The Great Depression took hold between 1920 and 1940 as Americans struggled with job loss and economic hardship. Economic growth allowed more people to buy cars and create a new generation of wealth. African Americans found opportunities in the North and found fame in the North's new interest in black culture, arts, and music. The word Renaissance is a word that means rebirth or awakening, especially of culture, arts, science, and philosophy in the early 1900s. The Harlem area of New York City became the center of such as movement. This Renaissance is in the black art, philosophy, and culture in the communities around. The World Harlem Renaissance lasted until 1930, but its effects are still felt today. One of the most well-known develops of the Harlem Renaissance came from musical community being with Scott Joplin, ragtime music in the early 1900s, jazz and blues, different and more lively, kind of like the difference between marching band music and hip-hop. Jazz blues were also more exciting because this meant that singers were musicians.
Tulsa, Oklahoma, there was a black community called Greenwood. Greenwood had thousands of black-owned businesses and homes. Due to segregation laws, Greenwood was separated from the white community by train tracks. The businesses in Greenwood were very successful. Some were even doing better than the ones in the white community, which the white people did not like. They hated the idea that black businesses were more successful than the white ones. So they accused a black boy of harassing a white woman. Scared that the boy would get arrested, 30 armed black men came to his aid. At the jail, the men fought, leaving 2 black men left and 10 dead white men. But the worst was still to come. The white men spread rumors of the black community's attack, but they had no plan to. A white mob stormed Greenwood, killing hundreds of people and tearing down businesses that they worked hard on for years. They even threatened to kill firefighters so they could not help. Up to 300 black people died and more injured, and almost 8,000 people of color were left homeless. The police did nothing to help the people of color, and the public was never educated on the event.
White children went to one school in Topeka, Kansas. There was a girl named Lydia Brown. She was black and lived close to a school for white children. Lydia's father, Oliver Brown, thought this was wrong. He wanted Lydia to go to the nearby school, so he and other families asked for help from a group called NAACP. The NAACP helped the families take their case to court. They said that having separate schools for black and white children was unfair and unequal. The case was Brown versus the Board of Education.
The Montgomery bus boycott was important because it was the first major protest against segregation in the U.S. Before the Montgomery bus boycott, Rosa Parks was arrested for refusing to give up her seat for a white person. This happened on December 1st, 1955. The Montgomery bus boycott started on December 5th, 1955. It was a 13-month protest against seating on city buses in Montgomery, Alabama. Rosa Parks, the WPC, and Martin Luther King was involved. African Americans were not hired as drivers. They had to sit in the back of the bus and were frequently ordered to give up their seat
for white people. When Rosa Parks was arrested, the WPC, which was led by Joanne Robinson, printed a flyer throughout Montgomery's black community. The next morning, there was a meeting led by the MIA. A group about 16 to 18 people gathered around a church called the Mount Zion Church. A lot of white people did not like the boycott. They wanted to protect the system of segregation and responded violently to the boycott. Martin Luther King even got postcards that read, "Get out of this town or else." These cards were signed KKK, which was a hate group. The Montgomery bus boycott mattered because it led to the Civil Rights Movement. On June 5, 1956, the court said that segregated seating on buses was against the laws now. City seats could not be segregated anymore. After that, the Civil Rights Act started.
The Civil Rights Act was to end injustice, so it is important. The Montgomery bus boycott was a part of the Civil Rights Act because it was a large-scale protest against racial separation on public bus line. Philip Randolph and Bayard Rustin were the organizers. The Pullman Porters Union were led by Randolph, and Rustin helped organize the Freedom Riders. Rustin and Randolph asked John Lewis and SNCC to join. NAACP also joined, and Martin Luther King joined, and other people set their eyes to march and end injustice. On July 2, 1964, the Civil Rights Act did a march in Washington. It matters because it banned discrimination on race, color, religion, gender, or national organ and public supplied employment and central governments as recognizable funded programs. The Civil Rights Act now issues have treated in policing, schools, transportation, and right services. This event reminds us to stand up for everyone's rights, but people still didn't have the right to vote.
Now, at the time, black people technically had the right to vote, but when they tried to register, the police often attacked or arrested them. This was a big problem in Selma, Alabama, where only 400 of the 15,000 black people that were old enough to vote were registered. This is because the white people that ran Selma's local government made black people take unfair tests in order to vote. This caught the attention of Martin Luther King Jr., a major civil rights activist. Dr. King came to Selma in 1964 and spoke to many people of color at Brown Chapel, a church in Selma. He encouraged more people to register to vote, and many people marched in the streets of Selma to protest. On February 18, 1965, Alabama state troopers attacked a group of peaceful marchers. They beat the protesters with their clubs and shot 26-year-old Jimmy Lee Jackson, who was trying to stop them from beating his mother. In honor of Jimmy Lee Jackson, activists planned to march from Selma to Alabama's capital, Montgomery. They were trying to get Alabama's governor, George Wallace, to enable all of Alabama's citizens to vote. But when the marchers crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge, they were met by about 100 Alabama state troopers. The police told them they had just 2 minutes to turn around. After just 1 minute, they attacked the marchers with their clubs, trampled them with horses, and scattered the entire group. When Martin Luther King received the news of this, he organized a second march and tried to get a judge's permission to march unharmed. The judge said he needed time to think about it, so Martin Luther King led the second march. Once they crossed the bridge, though, they were once again met with police. Martin Luther King kneeled and said a prayer before turning the march around to avoid any more violence. However, that night, 2 white people that were in the march were attacked and beaten to death. The good news was that all of this had caught the attention of President Lyndon B. Johnson. Johnson gave Martin Luther King and the others permission to march. So on March 21, 1965, the marchers set off. They soon arrived in Montgomery and went straight to the Capitol. Here, Martin Luther King and other civil rights activists gave speeches and were finally able to convince Governor George Wallace to enable all of Alabama citizens the right to vote. This also moved the president to sign into law the Voting Rights Act, which ended racism in voting.
On April 4, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was shot on the balcony of the Remain Hotel in Tennessee. King had come to help lead a march of sanitation workers. Despite the death threats and illnesses, King felt compelled to help the sanitation workers, so he returned back to Memphis and did one of his best speeches, now known today as the Mountaintop Speech.
I just want to do God's will. And he's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
A man named James Earl Ray followed him. He was deeply racist, and many of his prison friends remember seeing him fly into a rage whenever he seen King on TV. On April 4th, James Earl Ray escaped out of prison and then checked into a room which gave him a good view of King. At 6:01 p.m., Ray shot King on the balcony of the Romaine Hotel. Ray fled Memphis. It took 2 months for them to finally find him. He was found at London airport.
The Black Panther Party was a group of black people who wanted rights and freedom. The Black Panther Party was founded in October 1966 in Oakland, California, by Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale. Huey P. Newton was the co-founder and minister of the defense, who was born in Louisiana and moved to California as a small child. Bobby Seale was not only the co-founder of the Black Panther Party, but also the leader. He was born in Texas and moved to California as a small child. Robert James, also known as Little Bobby, was the first person to join the Black Panther Party in 1966 at the age of 16. The Martin Luther King assassination helped the Black Panther Party grow and become stronger. The main reason the Black Panther Party formed was to patrol black neighborhoods, police brutality, and self-defense. The Black Panther Party matters because a group of people who decides to stand up against injustice can inspire others to join the case.
Shirley Chisholm's presidential campaign paved the way for better representation of black people and women in politics. She was an educator and became very involved in politics. Shirley worked in the community and was elected to the New York State Assembly. Later, she went on to run for Congress. Unbought and Unbossed was the title of a book she published and her campaign slogan. Shirley became well known for her work in women's rights and rights for non-white people. The Black Panther Party supported her nomination as the Democratic candidate for the U.S. presidency. In 1973, Shirley published another book called The Good Fight. She lost the nomination to Senator George McGovern due to racism and sexism. After she lost, she continued to serve in Congress for 11 more years. While she lost the nomination, she opened the door for diverse candidates to run for public office. Shirley Chisholm fought for equality for all.
Barack Obama made history in 2008 when he became the first black president of the United States. His election was a powerful symbol of progress, showing how far the country had come from the days of slavery and segregation. The journey to this moment started centuries earlier with the arrival of the first American slaves in 1619. And the long fight for freedom and equality that followed from the end of transatlantic slave trades in 1808 to the civil rights movement of the 1960s. Each step forward in black history helped make Obama's presidency possible. His election was not just about one man, it was the result of a generation of struggle and sacrifice and determination. Obama's presidency is deeply connected to many key moments in Black American history. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 gave Black Americans the right to vote without unfair barriers, allowing people to support leaders who truly represent them. But a black president might not have happened. His presidency also reflected the achievement of black leaders like Shirley Chisholm, who became the first woman to run for president in 1972, just as the Harlem Resistance in the 1920s and 1930s gave black voices a platform to shine. Obama's presidency hoped to millions who had once been told they could never reach such height. Even though Obama's election was a major step forward, it did not erase the challenge that black Americans still face. His time in office highlighted ongoing struggles, such as racial inequality and the need for justice reforms. However, his presidency inspired a new generation of leaders to approve of that the fight for equality must continue. Just as the Black Panthers in 1966 fought for community empowerment, symbolized global progress, Obama's leadership reminded the world that changes is possible. His presidency stands as a milestone in ongoing story and future, showing that the sacrifices of the past continues to shape the future.
On February 26, 2012, Trayvon Martin was fatally shot by George Zimmerman, which invoked anger in many black Americans, such as Alicia Garza, Patrisse Cullors, and Opal Tometi, who started the Black Lives Matter movement in 2013. Trayvon Martin, a 17-year-old high school student with a bright future, was walking home from a grocery store when he was confronted by George Zimmerman. A neighborhood watch authority found Trayvon suspicious and called the police. After being told by the authorities not to interact, he decided to enter it anyways and ended up shooting Trayvon. This was not the first time this happened. For years, black Americans have faced racial profiling and violence. His case became a symbol of the fear and injustice many black communities had experiencing for years. The public's anger only intensified when George was not found guilty, strengthening the idea that the legal system had failed to protect black lives. On July 13, 2013, Alicia Garza, Patrisse Cullors, and Opal Tometi founded the Black Lives Matter to protest against police brutality and systematic racism. Their movement quickly gained momentum, inspiring marches, protests, and calling upon change from all across the nation. It gave a voice to those who demanded justice, not just for Trayvon, but for the countless others who suffered a similar fate. What began as a response to Trayvon Martin's death soon became something much bigger. The founders of the Black Lives Matter encouraged people to organize protests, share their stories, and demand justice for other black lives who were lost to violence and discrimination. Their message was clear: Black Lives Matter, and the world needs to recognize it.
The Black Lives Matter movement is a big part of the fight for freedom for people of color. Before this, Trayvon Martin's death helped start the Black Lives Matter movement. On July 13, 2013, Alicia Garza, Patrisse Cullors, and Opal Tometi started the Black Lives Matter movement because they wanted to fight against racism and unfair treatment of black people, especially by the police, who were white at the time. Black Lives Matter demanded changes in how police dealt with people of color. People all over the country wanted to show their support of colored people. They started or joined a local Black Lives Matter group called chapters. Each chapter focused on the needs of its community. They took on different issues. Some chapters focused on education, and others focused on working with people who were abused. All of the chapters expressed the value of Black Lives Matter. Alicia Garza said, "We are all clear that all lives matter, but we live in a world where that is not actually happening in practice. So if we want to get to the place where all lives matter, then we have to make sure that Black lives matter too. She said this on December 5th, 2014. The Black Lives Matter movement reminds us that all people should have equal rights, whether you're colored, a man, woman, transgender, or any other gender. We all should still have equal rights no matter what because we're all human beings. Because of the Black Lives Matter movement, Juneteenth was able to become a federal holiday.
Juneteenth is a key moment in the fight for freedom and justice, marking the official end of slavery in the U.S. Though the Emancipation ruling was signed in 1863, many enslaved people in Confederate states like Texas remained in slavery due to the resistance and slow enforcement. Juneteenth symbolizes African American resilience and in the ongoing fight for equality. It has been celebrated for over a century with parades, festivals, and gatherings. June 17th, 2021. Ensuring its legality as a national symbol of freedom.
Black history is not just about the past, it is about today. From the time the first African slaves arrived in 1619 to the election of Barack Obama, Black Americans have fought for freedom, fairness, and equal rights. Even though many important changes have happened, some problems from the past still affect Black people today. That is why some people believe in reparation, ways to help fix the unfair treatment Black Americans have faced for generations. Many of the events in this documentary show why reparations are important. The destruction of Black Wall Street in 1921 took away businesses and wealth that Black families could have passed down. The civil rights movement helped change unfair laws, but Black people still face challenges like lower wages and fewer opportunities to buy homes. The death of Trayvon Martin in 2012 led to Black Lives Matter movement, which fights against unfair treatment of Black people. Reparations can be different things. Some cities, like Evanston, Illinois, are helping Black families buy homes because of the past discrimination. California has apologized for its role in slavery and is working on ways to support Black residents. There is also a national plan called HR 40, which suggests studying how slavery affected Black Americans and finding ways to make things fairer. Reparations are not just about money. They are about recognizing the struggles Black people have faced. They are about justice, making sure everybody has the same chances to succeed. And they are about healing, helping the country move forward by making things right. As we finish this story, we must remember that Black history is American history. The fight for fairness and justice is not over. Up to all of us to learn from the past, listen to those still fighting for equality and working toward a future where everyone is treated fairly. The story is still being written, and we all have a part in it.
Wow, what a journey we've been on together. I can't tell you how proud I am of the work, dedication, and heart that went into bringing this documentary to life. Our students have truly shown us what it means to honor the past, reflect on the present, and look toward the future with hope and determination. Black history is not just about the names and dates. It's about the lessons, the resilience, and the voices that continue to shape the world we live in today. And if there's one thing I hope we all take away from this, it's that history isn't just something we study, it's something we make. The choices we make today, the way we stand up for what's right, and the kindness we show to each other, all becoming part of the story future generations will tell. To our students, thank you for your hard work, your creativity, and your willingness to dive deep into these stories. You've reminded us all why learning from the past is so important. To our families and community, thank you for supporting these students and for being here to celebrate their voices and their hard work. We appreciate you more than you know. So as we wrap up, I'll leave you with this. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep finding ways to make a difference. The work isn't over, and the story isn't finished. And who knows, maybe the next great chapter in history has your name on it. Take care, and keep making history. Miss Sarita.